שלום, שלום וברוכים הבאים לוובינר השלישי בסדרה של הוובינרים עם חברת FPS. אנחנו שמחים מאוד לארח אותם גם היום בנושא של עשיית עסקים עם גרמניה. Hello FPS, thank you for joining us. We are anxious to learn more about Germany. Thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you very much, Hannah. As always, it's a pleasure. Bruchim habayim and welcome to our FPS webinar on how to grow a successful business in Germany. We're very excited that so many people signed up to this webinar, and I'll promise that we'll do our very best to keep your minds off the upcoming elections for the next hour. Asked how to grow a successful business, Scott Belsky coined the phrase, "It's not about ideas, it's about making ideas happen." There are a lot of good ideas out there, and I'm sure you have one. But the challenge is to implement these ideas so that they can grow into something bigger, into a successful business. That's even more true if you want to open shop in a different country. Our goal is to help you gain a better understanding of the German legal system and its business culture, in order to give you the best possible starting position when conducting business in Germany. As always, please feel free to contact us with any questions you might have. As the head of our firm's Israel desk, I will do my very best to either answer your question, especially if it's real estate related, which is my expertise, or help you find the right colleague that can answer your question. You'll be able to send us questions throughout the webinar. In order to ask a question, please use the chat function on the right side of your screen. Just type in your question, we will collect them, and at the end of the webinar, we'll have all the speakers back on stage to answer your questions. Just a few very brief words about FPS if you don't know us already. FPS is a national law firm that advises clients on all areas of business law. And you'll find obviously a lot more information on our website. What you might find interesting to know is that we have a large network of notaries. A lot of legal acts require special notarization in Germany in order to be valid. And that's actually different to most other countries. So with our in-house notaries, we can draft the relevant documents for you and assist you with all the required formalities. Our focus today is corporate and tax related. Our next webinar will focus on a different area. We really try to cover all the areas that from our experience are most relevant for foreign businesses and investors. However, if you have a specific business area that you would like us to address, please feel free to send us an email. We really want to make this webinar as hands-on and relevant for you as possible. Today, we have a very interesting agenda lined up for you. First, we'll gain some insights on partnerships between startups and corporates in Germany, looking at the ecosystem. And whether you decide to work together with an existing company in Germany or whether you want to open your own subsidiary in Germany, it will require a fair bit of knowledge on corporate law. So therefore, our second segment will focus on questions like what legal forms to choose, how to incorporate, how to open a bank account, all the questions that will come up when you start doing business in Germany. Once you have successfully started operations in Germany, it's time to make that idea happen, to turn it into a successful day-to-day business. And what's more important for that than to understand the quirks of local tax and accounting requirements. Hence, our third segment will give you some tailored advice on tax and accounting. Hopefully, this webinar will answer many of your questions. However, if you need specific advice, please do not hesitate to contact us. Our webinar will give you a general introduction. It cannot replace a personal consultation, and it should therefore not be interpreted as legal advice. Now I'm pleased to announce our next speaker, Stephanie Kalke. Stephanie is a board-certified attorney for corporate and commercial law and a partner in our Berlin office. She will give you some insights on corporate law. This is the first time we're using a video bridge with one of our offices in a different location. So please bear with us and let's hope that it works as perfectly as it did during our test run.
Boker Tov and good morning from Berlin. I hope you can all see me and hear me. My name is Stephanie Kalke. Thank you, Nina, for the introduction. And I will run you through a short lecture on German corporate environment for foreign investors and businesses. Well, this will be our agenda for today, how to engage business in Germany, the legal framework, and a short glance on public subsidies. First of all, Germany is one of the most open economies in the world. There are hardly any restrictions for investments of foreign investors in Germany. In 2018, only 78 acquisitions have been reviewed by German authorities with regards to investment control. In all cases, the concerns of the German authorities could have been solved by contractual agreements with the foreign investors. In no case there has been a formal disallowance of any acquisition by a foreign investor. And of course, the fields of investment control are security or defense-related areas, such as arms and certain IT security enterprises. And there's cross-sectoral investment control, which applies only to non-EU and EFTA foreigners. And this applies to important infrastructure like electricity, telecommunication, and strategic services. So having said this, you're basically open to either invest in German companies, buy German companies, or open a German company. There are basically three different ways to run a business in Germany. Either you operate outside of Germany by hiring a commercial agent who is actually selling your goods in Germany. Importing goods, exporting goods to Germany is of course subject to German customs. There are different rules for different services and goods. A good way to approach the German market for the first time is to open a representative or branch office. A branch office has to be registered with a commercial register, and the economic risk lies with the foreign company, of course. A branch office is often used to sound the German market for the first time and to see how things are working and to approach business partners for the first time. Once you have already had a first glance at the German market, you may come to the conclusion that you either want to open a German company as a subsidiary of your company in Israel or invest into a German company. As I said, there are hardly any restriction for that. There might be some regulatory issues, especially in banking and insurance, which I will talk about a little bit later. And to give you just a short overview over the mostly used company forms in Germany, we have made this short list. It's the GmbH, which is the most popular company in Germany. It's a limited liability company with a minimum share capital of 25,000 euro. Then its little sister, the UG Haftungsbeschränkt, which is also a limited liability company and has been established in Germany as a counterpart to the English Limited. And such like the English Limited, you only need €1 as share capital in order to incorporate the UG Haftungsbeschränkt. Then, of course, there is the stock corporation, which has a share capital of, a ground capital of at least 50,000 euros, and then the limited partnerships like the KG or GmbH and Co. KG, which do not have by law a liability contribution, but this will be determined by contractual agreements between the shareholders. I want to run you through the process of establishing a German company on the example of a GmbH, because this is the most often used company in Germany. So in order to establish a GmbH, you need to go to a German notary. As Nina said, we are one of the few jurisdictions where a lot of legal steps have to be notarized. Also the establishment of a GmbH. So first of all, you need to notarize your articles of association. We can always assist you with drafting articles of association which are tailor-made for your purposes. Once you have the articles of association, the shareholders' representatives need to prove their power of representation and existence if it's not a natural person. For a company from Israel, this is usually being done by a translated Israeli excerpt from the Israeli commercial register, which needs to be certified by an Israeli notary and apostilled. Mandatory contents of the articles of associations are the corporate name, the registered office, which needs, of course, to be in Germany, the business purpose, the registered share capital, the shares, and the managing director. It's possible to have different contractual arrangements between the shareholders, like shareholders agreements. The benefit of this is, or the advantage is, that a shareholders agreement will not be registered and published in the commercial registers other than the articles of association. So more often, if certain rules between the shareholders which should not be open to public are supposed to be agreed, they will be done in a shareholders agreement, such as tag along and drag along and liquidation preferences. The second step is to open a bank account. So once you have had your founders meeting at the notary, and you have your notarized founding deed, you take it and go to a German bank. It's not very easy sometimes to open a bank account if you're not a German person, but it's possible. Stefan and Roy will, in our next lecture, elaborate this topic a little bit more. I just want to give you a short glance of what is needed. And we have, of course, as Maria said, contacts to banks in Germany and can also assist you with opening a bank account. So the required documents are incorporation documents, which have to be made, which have to be notarized, and the proof of existence and representation. And all shareholders must be able to prove their identity or must be represented. You have to take into consideration that all German banks perform extensive KYC checks under European money laundering laws, and some banks are more restrictive than others, but as I said, we are able to help you with that. Once you have opened your bank account, you have to pay in the share capital in order to have your company registered. For the GmbH, you don't have to pay in the full 25,000 euros in order to have the company registered. You have to pay in at least 50% of the registered share capital, which is 12,500 at minimum. After the payment has been made, you take the proof of payment and go back to the notary public, who will then file the registration to the commercial register. Once your company is registered in the commercial register, it's existing under German law. Between the time of the first founders meeting and the registration, you're already able to start business operations, but you have to take into consideration that the shareholders in between this period are fully liable for any claim which might arise against the company in incorporation. And if something happens, for instance, something goes wrong with the registration, and creditors could claim damages or claims directly against the shareholders. After registration, a company is validly existing, and it's a limited liability company, so shareholders are not liable in most cases. And the managing directors are the persons who stand in front. I already mentioned the managing director. He or she is one of the main persons, central persons in the GmbH. The managing director is the one who's running the operating business. The managing director is representing the company and you cannot limit the external power of representation, except if you have two managing directors, you can say, okay, they have only joint power representation. If there's only one, of course, that's sole power of representation. The managing director does not have to be a German resident, nor does he or she have to be a German nationality. So there are also no particular qualification needed in order to become a German managing director in a German company, unless this is mandatory for the business purpose of the company. This may apply to investment funds or to banking purposes, or also to pharmaceutical enterprises, where you need to have a certain qualification in order to run the company. One requirement is that no insolvency offenses, fraud or related criminal offenses have been committed by the person to be appointed as a managing director in Germany or any other country. The managing director is appointed by the shareholders meeting, and the managing director is the one, as I said, in front of the company who may be personally liable. This applies especially to insolvency cases. If there are any questions on that part, we will gladly answer them, because it's very specific and we don't have this much time in this webinar today. And you also have to take or bear in mind that a managing director is not personally liable for any mistake in the operating business course. So if a managing director is doing business and taking business decisions under what we call the business judgment rule, everything is fine, even though there might be a loss of the company. What are the further steps? So your managing director is registered, your company is registered. You need now to go to the Business Regulatory Authority, Gewerbeaufsichtsbehörde, and register your company. You need to find a tax advisor. Stefan and Roy will guide you through that process afterwards, and notify your company to the German tax authorities. You may have to register your company with a German Social Security office. If you want to hire people, then of course find qualified staff and accommodation. Just a short overview over the accounting and reporting requirements according to German law. This is the topic of Stefan and Roy afterwards. Accounting and reporting are in Germany based on the German Commercial Code, and all companies, all capital companies such as AG and GmbH and UG have to publish annual accounts. And all enterprises must maintain accounts reflecting their business transactions and financial positions. Just a short overview over the legal law, because this is a little bit different than in other jurisdictions. Most people work about 40 hours a week. There are, of course, different models of part-time working. A minimum paid vacation, according to the law, is 20 days for a 5-day week. We have continued payment of salary in case of sick leave up to 6 weeks, but there can also be agreements with the employee to pay even longer the salary in case of sick leave. Of course, anti-discrimination laws, and we have a right for maternity and parental leave. There is no hire and fire unless the company has less than 5 full-time employees. Nevertheless, always notice periods have to be observed, and notice has to be made in written form. And of course, our labor law department can assist you with that. Also, you need to bear in mind that your employees might have to apply for residency permits. This is something which comes up all the time, and our labor law experts are very experienced in that part. There are hardly any regulatory parts which might restrict you doing business in Germany, but there are some, of course, for some areas. For all companies applies that the business regulatory authority will supervise compliance with labor and customer and environment protection laws. There are, of course, some regulatory agency that need to be contacted. This applies to railway or energy or telecommunication sector. There might be licenses needed, especially for telecommunication or mail or railway. It's the Federal Network Agency. For insurance companies, investment funds, and also any fintech or banking, we have for the banking area the Federal Central Bank and the BaFin. BaFin is one of the main financial supervisory authorities in Germany and of course in Europe, and so they need to be contacted if you want to do a certain kind of business like fintech, insurtech, or even investment funds. Maria already mentioned that GDPR is a huge topic in Germany, and you need to be careful that you comply with all the regulations according to German law and EU law, because it's very strict and the penalties can be very high. So if you have any questions on that part, please contact our experts who will gladly help you and assist you with that. And this is really one part you need to take into consideration if you start business in Germany. Now we come to our last point in my lecture. It's public funding programs. We often have people asking if there are public funding programs and if they are only open to Germans or EU citizens. That's not the case. There are many programs in Germany and throughout the EU which are open to anyone who's doing business. They're ranging from supporting startup company at early stages to aiding small and mid-sized companies, and there are various forms. So we have like one-time contribution to help you with recruitment for people, wage subsidies or public loans for various purposes, up to venture capital from public VC funds and participation programs. This is just a short example of what kind of funding programs are existing. So there are loans, non-repayable cash incentives, guarantees out of the joint task improving regional economic structure. Then there's one very important public bank in Germany. It's called KfW. KfW has loan programs for all parts of business, from real estate over startups up to mid-sized and small companies. Of course, there are furthermore EU structural funds which grant loans and grants and guarantees for small and mid-sized companies. It's a huge variety of public subsidies. So if there are any questions for specific fundings, please do not hesitate to contact us. Well, thank you for your attention. I will now lead you over to Stefan and Roy, who will talk about tailor-made tax and accounting solutions, bridging the gap of expectations. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Roy and I will guide you within the next 10 to 15 minutes through the tax and accounting environments in Germany. Please be in mind, tax absolutely is a rather complex area, so we will be able only to touch really the major issues. We will give special considerations to our experience with Israeli companies that began within the last 3 years. And so let's start. How to engage in business in Germany? The situation that we typically face when we talk to an Israeli company which would like to enter the German market is the following structure. Everything starts with an idea, with a business idea in Israel. As Israeli entrepreneurs looking for investors, mainly in Israel and the US. And since Israel is a rather small country, Israelis start to think global right from the scratch. So very soon the first subsidiary is set up in North America, the US, for instance, APEC, Asia, Japan, or China. And at least until now, the gateway to Europe used to be the UK. This might change having the Brexit just around the corner. So what we see in the moment is, that a lot of Israeli investors considering to set up their European hub in a different country, not in the UK, due to the Brexit. So Germany is probably one of the favorite countries, which is right now on the spot. The first question is how do we start a business in Germany? Most of the companies we're dealing with, they do not want to have a GmbH or corporation or any kind of legal body in the first place. This is due to uncertainty, whether the market is ready, whether they have real experience, and of course the costs of the funding, the costs of the administration of a company. So most of them start with 2 or 3 employees on the ground, mainly salespeople. And the first question they ask us, who should be the employer of the German staff? And it's actually an easy answer from the German tax and social security point of view. It doesn't matter. It probably should not be an Asian company, but whether it's the UK, whether it's the US, or the Israeli company should not matter from the German tax and social security point of view. What you should avoid is, and this is something you have to consider in the employment contracts, is to avoid that the activities of these German employees would constitute a permanent establishment, and thus the taxable presence of the foreign employer in Germany. And this is mainly if you address it in the employment contract, that the German employees are not entitled to bind or to companies or to sign contracts on behalf of the foreign company. The German employees are, due to the fact that they're working on German ground, they're physically present in Germany, subject to income tax and subject to social security tax.
The social security tax consists of 4 parts: healthcare, invalidity insurance, pension, and unemployment schemes. The social security is thereby borne by the employer and the employee, each 50%. The tax burden is about 40%, but it depends on the salary. Employee's wage tax is calculated individually. The employee has to register himself. We are very happy to offer a help by this registration.
Yeah. The social security sounds rather high with 40%, but you have to bear in mind there are ceilings. And the social security is only applicable to a certain amount of income. So above 7,500, for instance, anything else paid on top of the regular salary is not subject to social security tax. So especially if bonus payments are concerned for salespeople in Germany, due to the fact that these people already have rather high salaries, there's no additional social security tax on this kind of income. One important message that you have to consider in such kind of situation, that what we experience at least, is that especially if you hire German employees who never used to work for a foreign employer, that you start to tell them that they are liable for income tax very soon when you start negotiations with them, because we saw very unpleasant situations where German employees were really unhappy to learn that they have to take care of all the income tax issues, compared to a situation where they would be employed with a domestic company, where the domestic employer takes care of everything. As I said, we can help you with this, and we can also assist your German employees with the tax registration. So let's assume next step. You identify that your business in Germany is successful, you think it's time for the second stage, and you consider to set up some kind of legal body in Germany. So we heard about different types of German legal forms. Stephanie told us About partnerships, I would skip this here because partnerships are not commonly used outside Germany. But so there are two different options at this stage. It's a German branch or a corporation. From our currently more than 50 Israeli companies we work with, there's only one Israeli company which has set up a branch in Germany, and we would not recommend a branch for the main two reasons. Number one, the foreign main head office is always liable and responsible for any damage claims. And number two, it's still a rather complicated legal body to handle in Germany. So our recommendation is always, and this is a common approach, to use the German GmbH. The next question raised is where to put this German GmbH. Which company should be the parent company? So until now, many thought, okay, it might be best to put the German GmbH under the UK entity, for instance, in our particular case, because due to the, let's say, relief that the German entity and the UK entity will have under the European Parent Subsidiary Directive. Again, since the Brexit just around the corner, this might change. So from our point of view, because right now, if you consider dividends, for instance, the dividend paid by a German GmbH to a UK limited would be zero withholding tax, compared to a situation where you have the Israeli company as a parent, where the rate under the treaty is 5%. So, but as soon as UK leaves Europe, there will be a 5% withholding on dividends from Germany to the UK. So we thought, why not implementing the German entity right under the Israeli company already now?
The German GmbH is subject to corporate income tax and trade tax. The corporate income tax is about 15% and the trade tax between 12 and 50%. That means that the overall German income tax rate is approximately 27 to 30%. In addition, the GmbH is subject to VAT if it qualifies as an entrepreneur for VAT purposes. In Germany, the standard rate for VAT is 90%, and there is a reduced tax rate of 7%, which applies on food and other favorite goods. The input VAT can generally be fully reclaimed if supplies or services of the GmbH are subject to VAT.
Okay, so now the GmbH has been established, and now the next question raised is how to remunerate the German company. What will be the business function? What is the business model which would fit in the group's transfer pricing rules? So what we currently see is just a rough estimate. Is 70% of the German entities, which are controlled by Israeli companies, start with cost plus, maybe 20% with LRD, which is a low risk distributor, and maybe 10% start already from scratch as a full-fledged distributor. So there's one particular issue that we saw several times in the field, very high level. The only thing you have to, I don't have time to explain the entire case, but just in case you're a company, not a software entity which licenses software, but a company which exports stock into Germany, and let's assume you consider to have a German warehouse. And we saw this, as I said before, we saw this situation several times, that the stocks were imported under the EU number, under the identification number of the German GmbH, and the import VAT has been deducted, but the selling took place from Israel to the customer in Europe or in Germany. And all of a sudden, years later, the German tax authority comes in and realizes, okay, the German entity should not have reclaimed the import VAT, and you have a tremendous tax burden plus interest to suffer. So please bear in mind, if you consider to export or import goods into Germany, the owner of the goods, when the goods are imported, is the only entity which is entitled, or the only person which is entitled to claim back the VAT. So please consider this carefully before you start the ball rolling, talk to someone about the VAT impacts on your export to Germany. Another issue is, let's assume a software company, you consider to grant licenses to your customers, to German customers, let's say many German customers, for instance, and the question is, should it be a license from the German GmbH to the German customers or directly from Israel in exchange for royalties? So the major difference is within Germany there is no withholding tax. So if you have German customers, you can charge the royalty and collect the royalty within Germany. If you charge royalties to a German customer from Israel, there's generally a withholding tax under German law of 15%. Of course, the Israeli-German tax treaty provides for a 0% withholding tax rate. But what you have to bear in mind, and this is especially in Germany, that you have to apply for exemption in the first place before you can rely on the 0% withholding tax rate. So in other words, your customer will have to withhold 15% withholding tax unless you're providing with a certificate of exemption. The problem here is if you have many customers in Germany, you generally would have to file an exemption certificate for every single customer in Germany. So if you fail to do so, the German customer will have to withhold the withholding tax, and you can apply for a refund, of course, at a later stage, but in any case, it will be a cash drawback, so to speak.
The monthly accounting is an important part of our work, but we often realize a gap of expectation between us and the Israeli clients, because in Germany, normally we have moderate fixed fees, and every additional work is invoiced per hour. But the Israeli clients want to have a fixed fee for everything. Therefore, we have to clarify the scope of work. Therefore, we have to clarify the scope of work at the beginning of our process, because we consider the clients consider us as an outsourced controlling department and have several reporting requirements. Therefore, we have to adjust an individual fee proposal for every client. We are familiar with many accounting systems like NetSuite, Priority, SAP, but they are not all in accordance with German law and accounting standards. Therefore, we have to make a double bookkeeping in our system and in the client system. And if we are working just in the client system, we have to make an application for shifting the accounts outside of Germany. There it is decisive where the data storing server is located.
Yes, I think this is the important message. You should discuss the scope of work in the first place very carefully, just to avoid frustrations on both sides. We are happy we can gain so many different, let's say, reporting sheets from our German system. So from that point of view, if you discuss with your advisors in the first place what is really needed, there can be a tailor-made approach, and there can be a fixed fee without charging additional money, without what we call suffering the surprise fee from your German advisors.
Often the clients ask us for statutory audit of the financial statements, but in Germany, these is only needed if the company is below 2 of the 3 criteria for the second consecutive year. The 2 criteria are the annual sales above of 12 million euros, the balance sheet total of 6 million euros, and an average employees of 50. But this happens not in the first or second year, so at the beginning, an audit is not necessary.
Yeah. Okay, let's assume the company is successful in Germany. So the next question is how to repatriate the profits. In our example here to the Israeli parent company, there's currently a withholding tax rate under the treaty of 5%. But again, domestic law provides for a withholding tax of 25% plus solidarity surcharge, and the procedure is the same as for royalties. The Israeli company, as a recipient of the dividend, will have to apply for the certificate of exemption in the first place in order to receive the dividend tax exempted. Before we finally come to a quick glance on the loss limitation rules, just one additional comment, something that we experienced recently, and it applies to VAT. We see an approach at the moment of the German tax authorities, especially the Berlin tax offices, challenging structures where a German GmbH has only Israeli managers. For us, general managers. For us, a very typical situation, because usually when you set up a company in Germany as an Israeli parent company, you don't want to lose control, you want to have full control of the company, and you usually put your local managers as general managers in the German entity. And we see that the German tax authorities challenges the permanent establishment for VAT purposes, which might end up in a loss of a certain type of input VAT. So this is something we will monitor closely, and if you have any questions on that, please do not hesitate to contact us in this area. Last but not least, not all companies will make profits. If you suffer losses, these losses, of course, can be carried back for corporate income tax purposes, up to 511,000 euro to the previous year, not for trade tax purposes. This is to protect the municipalities. But there's an indefinite loss carry forward. There's no time limitation. However, we have a minimum taxation rule that you have to bear in mind, which means that profits exceeding 1 million euro can only be offset against existing loss carry forwards up to a maximum of 60%. It's so-called minimum taxation. And there are additional restrictions in case of a harmful share transfer. But these are rather complex. But again, if you consider to acquire a company or to sell your company or transfer shares within a group, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan and Ray. That was extremely interesting. And now it's your turn. If you haven't done so already, please type in your questions into the chat window on the right side of your screen. We already have been collecting them. We have a few more questions that were directed at the general audience. One was asking, we are a diagnostic company in the veterinary area, and we really need help in order to understand how things are working in Germany and to hire a regional sales representative, and whether we can recommend any headhunters. Obviously, I think the question indicates that you already know we do not do HR services. Unless I just happen to know someone, like, I don't know, my neighbor looking for a job or something, but in general, we don't do HR services. What I always recommend when you are at a very early starting phase and really freshly coming to Germany is to have an introductory call. Send us an email and we'll set up an introductory call to understand what your product is exactly, what you want to do in Germany, what questions come up first. Oftentimes the question develop during our conversations, because then you get a better sense of whether you need information in the employment area or whether you need more business advice. And what we can help you with is to find that network that is so crucial in Germany. So to get you in touch with headhunters, to get you in touch with programs, funding programs, to get you in touch with accounting services, everything you need in order to start your business in Germany. We also have pretty good contacts to a lot of major cities. Obviously, that goes for Frankfurt and Berlin, but also for Munich and Düsseldorf and Hamburg. So we're always happy to also get you in touch with the people at the city if that's something that you need. All right, we have two more questions here. That one was asking what the time frame is for the registration process. I assume it's the registration for a GmbH. I'm sure Stephanie will be happy to answer that, but maybe also, I don't know if you can say something about that, how much time it takes to actually go through the whole registration process.
Yes, it's a very good question. So, and the answer is probably not very satisfying. It might be 1 month, it might be 1 year. Pretty much depends how fast you're able to set up a bank account in Germany. This is a crucial, this is a bottleneck, so to speak. So there are two ways to go. In a nutshell, you could acquire an off-the-shelf company, which makes it a little bit faster, of course, or you start with a GmbH from scratch. But in any case, at a certain point of time, you need to set up a bank account. And when you consider to set up a company in Germany, that's the first thing that you do parallel is to find a bank which is really willing to set up a bank account for you. Shall we
Yeah, why don't you add your question?
Okay, so we can add the text question that we received, the question number 1. If good comes into Germany and leaves the country, do we need to pay any tax? Well, we take this as a VAT question. So from a VAT point of view, we would say usually exports are not subject to VAT, regardless of whether the goods are shipped within the European Union or to a country outside Europe. And the question number 2, based on your experience, what is an appropriate cost-plus margin accepted by the German tax authorities? So there's, like always, never a one-size-fits-all answer. So what we see in the market is a range of 5 to 8%. And if you're within this range, I think you have good arguments towards tax audit. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. We have one more question that is really targeted at all our speakers. One of our hearers asked, what areas are interesting to make shared business between Germany and Israel? And first of all, I think you come with the idea. If you're passionate about your idea, you'll find someone who will be interested in your idea. And generally, you will see that in Germany there is a lot of established companies, but there is an innovation gap. And a lot of our German clients are actually looking, especially at Israel, to close that innovation gap, to acquire technology that helps them to work faster in a more competing market, and that also helps them with certain applicational problems that they might face, like say in the automotive industry or in other traditional industries in Germany. One thing I think that might be interesting for you, and it is rather unique in Germany to keep in mind, is that Germany has a strong, what we call Mittelstand, which are companies that are not world leaders, and or let's say they are not global companies in the sense that are very large companies that maybe already have innovation hubs in Israel, but there are family-owned companies that are market leader in a specific area. So they are very, very successful in certain market segments. And these companies oftentimes don't have, they don't quite know how to approach Israeli innovation. And they come to us and they say, we have a certain problem that we like to solve, but we don't know how to make the connection. So this is something to keep in mind, and we're happy to get you in touch with the right people to bring together these very successful companies in the Mittelstand in Germany and Israeli innovation. Also, Germany is a regional market, so depending on your product, it might be more interesting for you to focus on Frankfurt, for example, in fintech and banking. It might be, if you're in other areas, it might be more interesting to focus on Berlin or on Hamburg or on Munich. So it really depends a lot on what your product is and what sector you're looking at. Unfortunately, our time is already up. If your specific question hasn't been answered, please feel free to contact our speakers via email. You'll find contact information at the beginning of each presentation. Also, please mark your calendars for our next webinar at the end of November. We'll gain some insights on German real estate law. That should be interesting. And so thank you very much for a very productive session. Have a great day, have a wonderful week, and we look very much forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Bye-bye.